Welcome to the WAIR Chats podcast, a series where we dive into the conversations surrounding all facets of e-commerce and the people working to make it a more sustainable and productive industry for all. My name is Greg Moore, founding CEO of WAIR and your host for today's podcast. Today, I am super pumped. I get to sit down with Cadogan Price, CEO and founder of Cadogan. We talk about how he transformed his career from software sales to creating a men's luxury apparel company. We talk about the importance of personalization for building a loyal customer base and why being size inclusive is central to the success of an e-commerce apparel brand. Hi there, my name is Greg Moore. I'm the CEO of WAIR, and I am super pumped to have Cadogan Price with me today on WAIR Chats. Cadogan is the CEO and founder of Cadogan, which is a menswear brand built around luxury for living. Cadogan, how are you today, bud?
I'm good. Yeah, no, all good. We actually just got some inventory in today, inbounded at the warehouse. So today just turned into a better day.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Random question to start off. I'll go into my initial question, but you said you just got a bunch of inventory in. Does that are you at the point where that means that you're going down there and physically checking and stuff like that, or
No,
are there some other folks that are doing a lot of that stuff for you?
Those days are behind me. I've got some stories, man. There was one time a shipment came in that was so bad, and I was the one ironing the garments, trying to get them back into shape.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah,
I love that.
8 hours of my life. So no, by all means. No, we're based in Los Angeles. We've got a 3PL just east of LA in Commerce. Manufacturer provides, we go through the whole sampling process. We'll review like a pre-production sample, and traditionally, just due to the fact that we also have photo shoots, we'll probably get a sample from bulk production sent to us, which gives us a good pulse on overall quality. We kind of have a vetting process, so by the time it gets to the warehouse, we should be in pretty good shape.
That's awesome.
Hits the warehouse and comes with the packing list, any of the ancillary information needed, and then the warehouse, we have a 3PL that pick, pack, ship, and more importantly, when it gets there, they do the inspection. They'll place it into the right storage environment. Some things are stored on hangers, some things are stored in a carton, and then off we go. So it's nice to be a distance from that process, but I was just at the warehouse last week, so I'm not too close.
I can imagine, man. The I don't call them horror stories. I call them the grinding stories. That seems to be our word of the week here. But the grinding stories in the early phases are, they're awesome to tell as a history, not to be thinking about for your future, right?
100%.
But look, I'd love to start off. I want to know the person behind the brand, right? And you're a founder of a brand, which means you have that entrepreneurial journey. But one of the things that I always love asking is what's a motto from your past or a slogan or something that you may have heard, maybe your parents told you, you heard throughout the business, your life somehow, and that has made you who you are, right? Something that's been really critical to you.
What I'd say, and I wish I could tell you who shared this with me or who's responsible for this quote. Maybe I have to go do some research right after this, since I'm stealing probably someone else's words. But I did hear a quote that I really loved, which was, strive for greatness, live abundantly, always be humble. And so I think, if you can find some type of, beautiful universe where you can kind of accomplish all of that, it's a pretty probably outstanding and fulfilling life. So,
Nice.
Yeah, ultimately it drives back to impact, I think. And at the same time, why work so hard if you're not going to have a little fun along the way? So
Totally. I love that. It's funny. I think throughout that, in every scenario, the first one and the last one, people are like, yeah, totally. Live abundantly. That could be taken so many different ways. So do you have an interpretation of what live abundantly means?
For me personally, it's been really about travel. So I find that some of my best ideas come from being kind of checked out, sitting on an airplane, turn off the phone, maybe pull out a piece of paper, write a few things down, listening to music, and something just hits me. So for me, traveling, especially international, because then you get that chance to just reset, or you're working those, off time hours. So you work in the morning real hard, and you get the rest of the day to play, or vice versa.
Right,
so,
right.
Last year, I got a chance to go out to Scandinavia for a month and just kind of regroup myself and just kind of
Cool.
play. So to me, that's it's I've got some nice things, but for me, it's always been that investment and experience. So I would say that's kind of where it kind of triggers for me.
That's awesome. I'll never forget my when I met my wife. I think we were like 2 weeks into dating, and I was like, "Hey, I'm going to Barcelona. Do you want to come?" She's like, "What?" I was like, "Look, travel is a really important thing for me, and I love experiencing other cultures, the way that they live in those other cultures, right?" So it's like, not only am I traveling, but I'm literally living in the city in an Airbnb, and like gonna wake up and do exactly what they do every single day. And it was, ended up working out. We're married now, but for a decade. But it's really cool. I think just to like you said, let your hair down, enjoy some peace and quiet, but then also live and learn in other cultures, and it spawns a whole bunch of creativity, which I think is a great way of thinking about things.
And it probably maybe a nice tan or so rubs off some of those scars from doing the ironing in the warehouse or whatever. So it helps you reset on the battlements.
Nice. I love that. I love that. All right. Well, look, let's get into. I'd love to learn about what, because from what I remember, you were not in apparel before Cadogan, right?
So my background is in tech, which obviously has had its benefits, just kind of understanding some of that ecosystem, if you may. But
Hmm.
yeah, I was in software sales, so sales and operations. This idea kind of sprung up when I was actually out in Singapore. But yeah, so tech backgrounds. Grew up in a creative environment with an amazing family that was very hands-on with creative, very traditional art, acrylics, pastels, charcoal. But
Hmm.
yeah, life just kind of happened, and now I'm in the game of apparel and e-commerce.
That's awesome. What is something that you look back at where, looking at it now, it's like, oh yeah, this is just a piece of the apparel business. But when you started, you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't think about that complication. Like, I'm sure there's a lot of them, but
Yeah,
what's one of those things coming as an outsider
that's,
there?
we have it a couple hours. No, so I would actually say, and it's really resonated with us most recently as I'm really starting to understand the space is you take for granted how effective, especially the bigger brands are at buying, like meeting the market where the seasonality is. So
Mm,
when you're looking at fabric on like a header, right, which is just a swatch of fabric, I've been gracious enough to sit in a room with some really talented technical designers, fashion designers, and they can like feel a fabric and be like, "Oh, this is 2 ounces too heavy," and I'm like, "It feels like denim." You know what I mean? But from that perspective, it's like, well, this is because of that weight. This is primarily for women's, or this is
mm,
it's not. It's going to drape, not as structured as you would like. Lacks breathability, lacks stretch, all those components. So I think the brands that have been in the game for a while do that so well. Obviously, we're learning that game, and like I'm wearing something that's merino wool, very seasonal, very specific, but also has some amazing benefits. So really understanding that piece. When we go buy clothing, it's like, oh, is this cotton? Or, I don't even know if I look at the composition 90.
totally.
Now I do probably, but traditionally I buy something because I like it and I'd be like, oh, this fits but the brand had to go through that process of they probably had 15 different
Mm,
options for that one fabric. Um, and they were trying to, whether it was a seasonality play or year round play or something on trend. So I think that's quite interesting. And you start to understand like streetwear, right? It's different just because of the weight of some of those garments, especially in knits, those kind of things, right? Which as an everyday guy, I mean, that stuff kind of went right over my head for a long time.
totally.
I'd
I
say
love
that's
that.
probably something that's more recent than not. So truly, like we're in the thick of that and really understand.
Yeah.
It's cool.
I mean, that's pretty crazy because you guys are extending your line quite a bit, if I
Which is
remember
yeah,
correctly. I
which
mean,
is where that derivative of that conversation stems.
yeah, that's
Outerwear, where you really see it at most, I think, is in your knits and so forth, right? Because you have this range of your cotton blends. You can go more towards the polyesters, which then can turn into more athleisure. But then you've got things like viscose that you can play with, and depending on how that's knit together, that could be a women's fabric, that could be a men's fabric. The weight has a lot to do with that. Some of the other fabrics that are built into that matrix has a lot to do with that. So it's super cool, and you know you start to understand how you can kind of iterate and play, and the
mm,
difference just swapping out like a PK for a viscous, like it gives the customer a new experience. It gives the garment a different look and feel, and you don't necessarily always have to have all the brain power to create the next best thing, right? You're kind of sometimes iterating
totally.
or playing within an arena that you now have the freedom to play within, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
So with that, it creates an economy of scale where you can kind of introduce new product at a more effective rate. Um, and I'm quickly learning that that's a good way to win in this environment. So
That's awesome. No, I love that. It takes me to a story. So back in my prior life, I worked for a company called Sport Vision,
okay,
and we are in the Bay Area, right? And we are doing all sorts of like broadcast elements for sporting events.
nice.
And I remember, so this is back in like the early 2000s, right? So I actually wore a suit to business meetings back then, which was great. Definitely not do it now. But I'll never forget, I had a meeting in New York and it was in the heat of summer, and I go out there and I'm wearing my suit, and I mean I am dripping through my suit. It's like it's disgusting. And meanwhile, I see all these people running around in these suits, like almost running with no sweat on their face whatsoever.
Mm,
And I'm like, yeah, it's a different environment. It's more wet here, so like they're probably used to this, but like they have to be so hot in those suits. So finally I stopped one of them and I was like, hey, like why, what's going on? Can I feel your suit? And sure enough, like the suit fabric was entirely different than what I
mm,
was wearing. Whereas wearing like this really heavy wool blend, and they were wearing like a really light polyester wool blend. And I was like,
I like that.
this is that's the first time it hit me where it's like, oh, construction of materials matters. It's a
it,
huge difference.
it really is.
Um,
Yeah, no, it is. And to that point, like you can have all these different options for customers as well, which is pretty cool.
yeah. So given the sort of inherent optionality, I know you guys lean into a lot of personalization on the site, right?
Mm.
And I think your goal here is to provide almost like a personalized experience to every shopper that comes through to help them get the products that are going to best fit to them. So how do you go from the information that you're capturing on the site and on the shopper's experience there back into the production house and the planning and the strategy side of things, such that you can continue to evolve and iterate on that personalization journey?
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. So give I'll give a brand Revolve credit where credit's due. So I know those guys had a bit of a tech background, and they built like an internal technology that actually like would mark the individual characteristics of a product, and therefore they could basically see, hey, products with this hardware are doing better than others, right? So I think it's important, you know, working with the design team. I've got the product vision, and then I kind of parlay that into hopefully a language they understand, and then we kind of work together. But customer feedback is important. So, with that in mind, definitely on the returns and exchange side, we're garnering feedback. We survey our customers, so I'd recommend absolutely people to do that,
Mm,
especially if you do like an engaged 60 days or people that are really fresh and recent with the brand. It gives you a wonderful feedback loop on, maybe some characteristics that you want to know more about of your recent collection, some demographic or psychographic information about the customers themselves. So that's always helpful, right? To understand, who is this guy? What's he into? What's he doing? Obviously, creating that avatar
hmm
gives you that competitive landscape to kind of pay attention to as well in terms of what's happening in the market. Um, and then, where we kind of, it's a fantastic conversation piece because it's when it gets to design, it's trying to understand that and make improvements on construction and overall fit and really elevating the brand and that characteristic. But it's also sometimes hard for people to tell you what they want when they don't know what they really want. So it's a lot
mm,
of fun to be like, I consider us like a fashion intentional brand. We're not in the game of merchandising where we want to have like one shirt in 20 colors and let that be it. We
yeah.
want to make intentional clothing that maybe we only have in one color or have a very unique characteristic to it. We don't plan
Mm,
to iterate on that and make 10 different versions of it. And so with that in mind, that's our point of view to the market. Being like I don't definitely want to say a fashion house. I don't want to undermine what the great luxury brands have done, but at least coming to it with a point of view with design with intention. So it's a balance between absorbing the information and doing your surveys and absolutely on fit. That's an easy win because that doesn't impact design as much as it does
mm,
construction. But when it comes to design, like we want to be able to play, right? Like we want to create something that maybe isn't as evident in the market, whether that's through a fabric or hardware. But it's important. It's important to understand at the end of the day, if black hardware is doing really well, then you can't avoid the facts. So it's
yeah,
an
yeah, that's right.
interesting dichotomy between the two. I don't know if that answers directly, but it's a balance because we want to absorb that information, but we don't want that to allow us to kind of just create the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you could. It's easy enough for consumers to answer a survey, full of radio
Mm,
buttons and kind of give you information that's self fulfilling. I think it's really hard to try to navigate to get to unique insights and unique innovation, right? Like you almost really need to take a step back and think about what's a survey we're asking. Do we need to change those questions to get
mm,
to more creative responses? Do I need to physically pick up the phone or have somebody call our customers and actually talk to them about it in order to get this data? And then can I get enough of that, right? So I think that the whole journey where you're pulling in information from a customer base is really hard. But if you can do it well, it provides a lot of unlocks for the brand, which is really cool. It's really good to see you guys do that.
we actually we have a post purchase, like when you purchase on the actually order confirmation page. There's like 5 questions, and to your point about asking the right questions, we ask that question like, what are some of your favorite brands? Thinking that that would be a really great question to ask. And like the way it was framed, it was something like that. It might not have been the exact, but it was intentional to understand what the competitive landscape is for our customer.
Mm-hmm.
Every brand, everyone that came back was like, Louis Vuitton, Tom Ford, and I'm like, man, we have a very wealthy customer base. and, and we shifted the question to, what other brands are in your closet right now? And it
Mm,
was so interesting to see, like, yeah, there's still some of that. People definitely have their luxury pieces, but the shift in the feedback loop was phenomenal.
totally,
So it's just super interesting because you can just, to your point, like it's a very simple question. It was intended the same way, but the responses were very different. So if you
totally.
approach the whole business in that capacity, obviously you end up with some very different delusional ideas. So it's
That's
quite
funny.
interesting.
One of the I'll never forget the story. It was I was talking with the Gap leadership team, like at the C-suite level, and we were talking about returns data and returns information. And I was like, how do you guys, we personally were interested in like what's your return rate for sizing reasons. And it was really interesting. This was like 3 or 4 years ago, and their CRO at the time goes, "Look, we don't know." And I go, "Well, how do you not know? Like you survey for this." He goes, "There's a really interesting thing that happens in surveys." He goes, 9 times out of 10, the customer is going to pick the first option, right? And they just simply do that if they don't have a ton of brand loyalty or they don't really care about giving feedback to the brand. And in our case, the challenge is that most of our customers are just picking the first option. And so the way we tested this, right, is we had these survey links in there. We had people, filling out the stuff and like, oh my gosh, size and fit is such a huge problem for us. Like everybody's clicking it. And then one day, one engineer was like, I'm just going to randomize the buttons and then I'm going to track what order they appear on the screen. And sure enough, all of a sudden, all the results got totally scattered. Right, all of a sudden, like the reasons for the return were all over the place. Right, it was
Mm,
random
yeah.
sampling, but the first one still always got picked, and I was like, "Oh, that is hilarious." But it does go back to that, like, how do you ask the question to get the information that you need to know, such that you can make a decision, and how do I tease out the psychological biases of the shopper, right? And I thought that was one of those experiments that was run really well, right? Such that the entire team really knew like why they were doing it and what
Mm,
the hypothesis was. And it was really cool to then hear about the results. So that's really led us into a lot of what we do and how we ask questions of both customers and shoppers and things like that, which I think are really unique and specific.
no, it's very
Um,
interesting. Yeah, I love that.
yeah, Kettering, one of the things I was interested in is like you guys a lot of times for first time fashion founders, one of the biggest challenges that I'll hear over and over again is size and fit, right? So both from looking at like what are the grade rules and pattern blocks that I want to create to right what's my size run from an inventory perspective to how do I communicate that to what are the models that I shoot on.
Mm.
How did you guys think about that from the beginnings, and then how has that evolved over time? And then what are some of the solutions that you've leaned into to help with that?
That's a wonderful question. With
I just realized it's very loaded too. It was like
Yeah,
three
no,
questions in one.
it's a powerful question. It's one that, look, at the end of the day, we're still trying to unlock. Um, what I would say is, day one, I knew that I wanted the brand positioned, with more or less an aesthetic that was, more of a premium look and feel. So we spent the money, we kind of put our money where our mouth is. So we hired agency models, and we really approached it in that capacity. Um, all in all, I think that still is very much so a clear pillar within our photography and videography strategy. Um, but very much so now expanding, and have been for the last few months. It was never necessarily like a conversation around race or anything like that, but it's really body shape and size. And so we've been really evaluating and exploring kind of what all the options are there. We do carry all the way up to, for some sizes, up to 5XL. So
Mm.
it's been important to find ways to communicate to the audience that is looking for a larger garment, and as well as your everyday kind of guy, maybe it's a medium to an XL. Um, with that in mind, like, we always want to be an all-inclusive brand. So I see a lot of brands actually charge a different price point, and I understand why from
Mm.
the costing perspective on the back end, because there are manufacturers that will have different rates for different sizes. Um, but I always felt that no need to single out a member of the community in that capacity, right? That's not a part of our ethos. So those sizes have been kind of a consistent rate across the board. The learnings, to your point about fit and so forth, is when you get into your small to maybe even XL, 2XL, it's a pretty standard across all brands. It's a pretty standard incremental increase, right? Like your wrist cuff may increase pretty much across most brands, probably about zero point 0.5 cm.
Hmm.
Right? When you get into what's different about us as humans is our wrist does not increase proportional to our size.
Yeah.
So then when you get into 5XL, if you don't know your grading rules really well, next thing you got, a wrist that just comes all the way down, and the sleeve fits great. So, we've made those mistakes. There's no questions asked. And so, the grading is really interesting. I mean, truth be told, and I think the industry is kind of um, pretty clear about it now. I've had conversations with a lot of different business owners, which is understand those brands that you just not about aesthetic, but the fit you really like, and study those brands and understand if like where you
Mm.
make those changes. And then I must have tried on 150 tees before we made our fit. You know what I'm saying? Like, and
Totally.
really look for what. Oh wow, you see this variation in sleeve length, and you just got to get to that place. I personally, at the end of the day, I'm making clothing that I want to wear. So
Mm.
that's a big barometer for me. And the other part of it is we have fit models and we do other fittings, but I just happen to be a pretty decent size medium in terms of that. So I use that as kind of a barometer, and I would, if we go into women's, like, that's a different discussion. We're gonna have to learn a lot because that's such a
Yeah.
new environment. But I would say if you're starting out, like, take advantage where you can take advantage. If that makes, you know what I'm saying? Like, if you kind of got the right, if you're kind of a standard medium, like, make a brand that you love. I'm sure there's somebody else out there that fits within your size block.
Yeah.
Um,
That's a good point.
and so that's that first piece. And then, from a model's perspective, like, we've realized that we've got an audience that we're very fortunate that, and I think it has to do with the price point of the product, but it's very much so in their late 40s, 50s, and so we've brought models in now in their 40s and 50s, which that's been a great experience, showing kind of that range of age, and just some of the opportunities there.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, that's one where look, next month we'll do something completely different. You know what I mean? So I think it's one where you're kind of looking at the data. So GA is a great touch point for that. Obviously, all these surveys and these conversations. Um, Looking at the markets that we're selling into, that's a good point in regards to styling, how fast those markets are. We're in the big metros as in regards to our
Hmm.
largest volume. Um, there's opportunities to kind of garner that feedback, but if I was to distill it down from day one, like, it was really selfishly like, what did Cadogan want, you know, the fit, and so, right? Because otherwise, it's like you're making something for someone else, which is a beautiful thing. But I at least think we had some confidence coming out the gate that what we were making, we didn't know if, I didn't know if other people would love it. That's understandable. But at the
Yeah.
end of the day, it was something where I knew it was going to fit. I had other people and friends try it on. Like, it wasn't, we're not in the high fashion game where it's like traditionally a lot thinner models and more evenly
Right.
cut in terms of sizing. So yeah, it's been a journey. That one's tough because it's truly I wouldn't say it's necessarily change. I think it's think of it like a plastic bag. When you stretch a plastic bag and you fill it with water, then you stretch a little more, it holds more water. And so we just continue to kind of, and it'll kind of, as you stretch it, it goes in one direction, another direction. But it's still
Mm.
at the nucleus, the same idea. And so I think that's what's been so cool is we've never deterred from kind of the vision, and we've been fortunate where we kind of had an idea of what our customers would like, and people have connected with that. But it's, hey, that customer that we anticipate is actually a little bit older, or that guy
Right.
actually wears 5XL, so let's make so it's just exposing ourselves to engaging with those folks. And at the same look, we've made a lot of mistakes along the way, but that's that part where you have to be able to have that feedback loop so that
Yeah.
you can obviously understand where you went wrong and just kind of make some better decisions.
Totally. Yeah, it's a lot of like how I think of product. It's like, well, look, if it doesn't work out, at least I'm gonna like it.
Yeah.
It's one of those things. I just have this picture in my mind. Cadogan's like, so look, if this doesn't work out, then I'm gonna have a whole assortment of jackets that I can wear for the rest of my life. So this is gonna be perfect.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I mean, that's exactly right. And trust me,
Nice.
my team's checked me a few times, so I won't. But I think at the end of the day, you got to love what you're doing. So there's got to be some relationship with it that's probably deeper than just dollars.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know what I mean? So,
that's right. So we've kind of talked about the sizing from a design and technical design perspective. How about from a communications perspective? Um, like what tools or what solutions are you guys leaning into there to help the customers with that part of their journey?
yeah, no, I mean, truly, that's where you guys have been phenomenal. So when it comes to the platform itself, we've actually over time rewritten our own definition of like our modern fit. Um, and that's been really interesting. And actually, as more senior people have entered into the organization, um, that's some of the feedback loop. Like, hey, this could be better defined. Something as simple as that. When it comes to wear, we've put that like right where the size guide would be traditionally, right over the different sizes available,
Hmm.
because we want to make it as we used to actually have it kind of in a mint box and try to bring attention to it. But psychologically, as a consumer, I think we're so dialed in on e-commerce to like go to where there's like a natural place for a size guide.
Mm.
And so we've done two things. One is we put your integration right there next to the size guide. And actually, when you click and open the size guide, it also says find your perfect fit, leverage our assistant. Um, those two have been phenomenal for us. We actually, even on the customer service side, if somebody reaches out and they're pretty unclear about their size, we just push them right into that pathway of
Oh, really?
where, yeah, just because we've over time with the help of Troy who works for you, we've been able to flush out a lot of the elements that um, there's two parts. One is as an organization, we've done our best to standardize our fit. The other part of
Mm.
it is making sure the data on all is aligned across multiple sizes and as well as styles and so forth. And so, I ultimately have a lot of confidence in the output from Where, and we did quite a bit of rigorous testing, obviously in those early days when we were onboarding, and it's been great. So we leverage a link to basically push people to just get the answer they need that way.
Yeah.
Um, so that's like that whole ecosystem, I'd say. Look, at the end of the day, like I really encourage people to reach out to customer service team. Some of that dialogues in our automation, so that if they have questions, if they're unsure about something, I always day one, just because I've been a part of operational teams, I look at customer service as an asset. A lot of people will look at it as kind of a cost center.
Yeah.
But I look at like if those people are unhappy, like they're the ones engaging with our customers. Like they need to
Totally.
be treated like cloud nine and well taken
Yeah.
care of and understood, and their voice needs to be heard at all times, and they need to feel supported. And they also have to know like not every customer is not always right, so it's like a balancing. So they feel protected, they feel safe,
Mm.
and they want the best for the brand, and they represent the brand. People talk about like influencer ambassadors. I think your customer service team is everything in many ways.
Totally.
So, and I'm very grateful for the four people we have together. So with that in mind, they understand the tools that we've created within our own ecosystem to support those type of conversations. And we have our macros and Zendesk and so forth, but WAIR's been a big part of facilitating that conversation piece.
I love that. Yeah, it was funny. I was going to the site earlier before this recording, and I noticed Troy told me that you guys had integrated Wear into the size charts, and I was like, man, what a great idea! Because there's still those consumers that, as you said, they're preconditioned to a specific shopping experience, right?
Mm.
And look, size guides have been around since, I mean, I don't know, like the 1950s in the Sears catalog, right? And they just moved to e-commerce, and then they're there still. But to that point, they offer a really limited experience. It's always static, right? So it's never going to be recommendationary. Or I think I just made up a word. It's never going to be a recommendation, right? You're always going to have to do some work. But it is really important information. And so leaning into the shopper that still wants to click on that was like, hey, don't forget we have this tool that helps you do this better.
Mm.
Is really, really interesting. So I love the way that you guys structured that in there. The other thing that I thought was really cool that you did is in your chatbot, I was just like playing around with it. I typed in what's my size.
Mm.
And sure enough, like it pops over. It's like, oh, go use WAIR, right? It's the
Yeah.
thing that's going to help you get your size. Like that's a cool concept. What gave you guys the thought of that? Like I don't think we've really talked about that a lot publicly.
Um, I think it's just that. I mean, at the end of the day, like, and we've just brought in actually like a fractional COO who's very experienced, which I'm very grateful for. And um, I'm trying to isolate. I think in a business, there's this concept of like a couple key aspects of business that move the needle. You know what I'm saying? Like at the end of the day, like for us, I know new product and restocks absolutely do that, of course. But I think
Sure.
there's other elements that really drive conversation in a really beautiful way that create ultimately a conversion. And WAIR, to me, very much so is one of those tools. I mean, if you just
Mm,
look at, I think it's like 6x for us, the conversion rate of somebody using WAIR versus somebody that uses maybe a traditional size guide or not a size guide at all, the data speaks for itself. And so and Troy will speak to, we've kind of tested a lot of different ideas of how to use WAIR in order to bring attention to it. I think there's still some to be further discovered and some to be further leveraged.
hmm
And with that in mind, one of the things I'm thinking is like a quiz and take people through multiple questions that maybe allow them to align with the product that makes the most sense for their buying behavior at that time.
Yeah.
And then as part of that questionnaire, they get dropped into like it's just a natural progression. Okay, great. Like leverage our assistant. Like we call it Fit Assistant. I think that just
Mm,
makes it more like a virtual assistant
totally.
versus like Fit Advisor is cool, but it sounds more like a technology where assistant sounds like somebody's there to kind of help you.
Yeah, I like
Um,
that.
and so when they click it, then they would kind of so that's something that we're mapping out and looking into, which would be more of gamifying the experience of
hmm
buying as well as sizing. But with that in mind, yeah, I truly would say we've looked at ways to incorporate WAIR outside of that very traditional sense of why it was created in the first place in regard to comms, because I think if we can do that more effectively, we have a greater opportunity to engage with our customers. And the reality of it is for us specifically, we anchored ourselves in those early days. Our keystone primary product that just and still does very much so does very well is our leather jackets, and you're talking about a $500 plus item. Somebody
hmm
does not have the luxury of obviously touching and feeling it, but more importantly, trying it on.
Right.
So in those early days, I definitely understood, and I was very excited to come across WAIR that we were going to need to leverage a technology that just offered some further level of confidence because it is still a very probably daunting experience for many customers to pull the trigger on that purchase.
Yeah.
Uh, and so, with that in mind, the further we can channel people into an experience that removes options and gives people the recommendation, I think the more comfort and trust there is around um, the overall experience they're going to have with the brand. And that's kind of the
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. It's funny. I mean, I think at the end of the day, there are a lot of tools out there meant to help and aid and personalize the experience such that it leads to higher conversion, right?
thing.
And I think in a lot of cases, you get this like trade off, right? I can make it really easy for you to convert, but can I make it really easy for you to keep the product that you buy? Can I make it really easy for you to have this positive experience with it and then come back to us and shop another product down the road, right? And like I said, a lot of times these things are not even disjointed; they are literally in conflict with each other. And that's an area of the business where we really spend a lot of time on it. It's like, how do we think about not just this experience, but making sure it's a great shopping experience so that the next time a shopper comes back and shops for Cadogan again, like they're going to have the similar experience that's going to help them make the appropriate decision. But it's a really crowded space in the conversion sector. But it's funny. I love to hear you say that, WAIR is one of those critical pieces that really helps to aid the shoppers in making a decision, therefore leading to higher conversion.
Yeah, data speaks for itself.
Yeah, totally. So speaking of data, I, I I think you guys are doing some cool stuff with the data. I'm not exactly sure, but I'd love to hear. Obviously, nothing sensitive because I'm
No,
sure you've matured it such that it's providing a lot of value. But I'd love to hear how you guys are using a lot of data because like one of the big things that we came across really early on is that we want to help shoppers at point of sale. But if you have access to this information after the sale, you can do some really creative things with it. And from our last conversation, I think you're leaning into that a fair amount. I'd love to just hear about that.
yeah. So you're absolutely correct. I mean, I guess it's fortunate just being that I kind of a little bit of a tech background. So I understand. One, I understand that because that was a big conversation when I was in tech was big data. So everybody had data, they
Mm,
didn't know how to leverage it.
mm,
So and it's easy to get overwhelmed with so many different point of views and opportunities to kind of dissect. You can very much so get lost in the weeds and go down a rabbit hole that you know could or could not provide value. So um, when I think of data, the biggest characteristic that I'm starting to come to terms and grips with is it's the alignment of your organization looking at the same data set.
mm,
So it's great when look, there's some small wins that can happen, and don't get me wrong, somebody can look at something and bring a point of view to the table that we're not all seeing. But when you get together in a team environment and you're not looking at the right dates or you're looking at a different equation to come up with your average order value, let's just say, I don't know, something like that, right? Or net MER versus your marketing efficiency ratio, but your
mm,
marketing efficiency ratio plus tax and shipping versus, what I'm saying? Like
mm-hmm.
you get into
Yep.
this conversation where you're talking to the agency and they're seeing a completely different number than you are, or whatever it
Totally.
may be. So to me, it's that's the starting point, and so we took the opportunity and the time. It's been a multi-month progress process to like build the internal dashboard that's starting to centralize these conversations, and then you can have rhetoric after that, right? So once we get everybody on the same page, look, it's the same thing with WAIR. WAIR works for us. Now let's put our heads together about how do we make WAIR a more efficient and effective tool for us,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's the place I think really strong and wonderful organizations get to, where there's that beautiful sense of alignment, and then from there you're leveraging the interpersonal knowledge and success and experience of the like-minded people in the room, or different-minded people in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the first piece of it. And so what I'd say is, from a dashboard perspective, like we're pulling in our marketing metrics, our marketing data by platform. We're pulling in um, a lot of really wonderful product information, performance of product, sell through of product, any additional details that make sense, and then and in a lot of ways it's also time saving, right? We're pulling probably information from 5, 6, 7 systems, which
Mm,
allows everybody to look at the same data set, right? You guys
right.
actually have access to this information versus jumping platform to platform and trying to massage the information together
Totally.
ourselves and stitch the information. Um, and then there's like some executive, like we can literally just pick a month, and we've got all the information for December 2020, in a report like that, which allows us to compare months, understand where certain trends are within the business, so that we can understand from a financial position certain windfalls we need to be thoughtful of. So it's you know I'm fortunate. Like the business has attracted some wonderful people. I'm just kind of trying to create a sense of clarity around the data so that it's not big data, but it's actually actionable insights. And
Hmm.
those guys know what they're doing, right? That's why they got hired. They know far more than I do and been in this game a lot longer than I. So it's just giving them access. And it's really not so much, QuickBooks is QuickBooks. So we've got a lot of wonderful information there, but it's like, yeah, but that doesn't tell you much about our marketing platforms. And
Right.
so centralizing information for cross-functional teams, I think, is such a powerful thing, because then everybody's a little bit more coherent on what's happening within the organization, and can help drive the ship a little bit more effectively.
Yeah, I love that. I think we're starting to see. I mean, I talked a little bit about my background in sports, but in the sports analytics world, like that was very omnipresent. Was that
Mhm.
data all lived in disparate systems? It was never pulled together, and so therefore a lot of value couldn't be garnered from it. And all of a sudden, that change happened. Like with the Red Sox pulling at the Epstein and like some of the other guys, Michael Fishman for the Yankees, that came in and like, no, like data is our way to win. And
Mhm.
it was a really interesting thought there, but it's happening in e-commerce too. And so I've already seen two industries go through this transition, and e-commerce is starting to do it. And it's really cool to see because now all of a sudden the ability to create a better experience can now be quantifiable as opposed to just sort of like subjectively guessing.
Mhm.
And that's a really, really cool aspect. All right. So I've got two more questions to wrap up because I've kept you for a long time and I appreciate
That's all good.
it. So one of them is I was talking to a bunch of people in the industry, and a lot of economists are talking about sort of the recession of 2024 or 2023. I mean, and people are starting to kind of like downsample teams. They're starting to make different inventory decisions and things like that. Are you guys not so much thinking about that from Cadogan's perspective, but from a general perspective in e-commerce and retail? Like, are you starting to see those headwinds? And are you nervous about them? Or are you kind of like, if we just run a good business focused on strong unit economics, like we'll see our way through it? I'm just kind of intrigued at a high level there.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say, look, we've had some partners along the way that have come to the table with some excuses of that nature.
Mm,
That didn't sit very well with me because I have looking for solutions, not problems.
yeah.
With that in mind, I think you just got to take care of your house, man. Like it's one of those things where I've really looked at the business that we created, and I thought that it could be needed to be improved for any economy. And so we are very focused at this time on creating multiple access points to the brand. Doesn't mean that there's a deviation in quality. What it means is that we're through those fabrication decisions, through those hardware decisions, and so forth. We have the ability to invite more people to be a part of the community. Um, then, and as a result of, I guess if you were to think of the populace, you're going to see a shift in maybe someone that traditionally buys luxury is going to buy something a little bit, still needs clothing, still wants clothing. So they're going to buy something a little bit further down the food chain. And then somebody that's buying maybe some higher end stuff is going, or kind of mid tier, is still going to want some of those experiences. So they'll buy the things they can afford. So um, at the end of the day, I think it's important to be cognizant of the environment and the activities that are happening around us. That's super important. But from our perspective, and I'll be frank, like we're not Hugo Boss yet, right? So that is a whole different dichotomy when you've got employees in the thousand stores that are, and something like COVID rocks a brand, an organization like that in a whole different light. So this is coming from an understanding of who we are today. We would have to be very cognizant of those conversations as we continue to evolve and grow. Um, However, I saw an opportunity that mirrors kind of, I'm sure, some of the trends in the market for us to just lean into our business model more effectively. Um, and at the end of the day, I think my recommendation to a lot of people is um, technology is a wonderful thing, but at the end of the day, I think we all crave a human experience. And so it's something back to the conversation around customer support. We have a very diligent and disciplined protocol on customer support, and they're expected to pick up the phone more often than not, as well as email and so forth. But my point being is like we are we want to automate as much as possible without automating the human touch. And I think that element of conversation and experience and so forth will always hold a greater weight, and people will find the ability to put their money into things that they love and they want to be a part of. And so I think there's that balance there, if that makes sense. And I think e-commerce is a little scary because it violates that a little bit. So it's finding a healthy balance.
Yeah. Awesome. Sorry, my kids just got home
Oh,
from
of
school.
course.
So
No, sure. They're living
they're,
their best lives. They don't even know what's happening outside.
oh no, man, I love it. They just come in. Doesn't matter what's going on. Like, Dad, can I give you a hug? I'm like, man, I love that. It's just like clinging on the legs. It makes my day every single day.
No, it's
Um,
okay.
yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense, right? And I love what you said. Take care of your house, right? At the end of the day, as a founder, as a CEO, like you have to understand what makes your business move.
Mm,
And the other thing that I really strongly appreciate is the focus on the customer experience, right? Our job as customer facing people is to make you happy, right?
mm.
I mean, assuming that
Yeah,
you want to be happy with the product,
yeah,
right? But leaning into that is really cool. So that's a very awesome thing. So to wrap up, my last little question here.
yeah.
We talk a lot about work, right? and and our life there. But one of the things I love is just to learn like about you as a person. Like, what's one your favorite activity, and then how do you find time to do that? Like, how do you find time to balance what you're doing currently with what you like to do in your personal time?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, healthy or unhealthy, I probably don't love like being alone. So I'm either with my wife, myself, just having a good time and being out.
Hmm.
But I think we really enjoy like just spending time. Like we're going to go on a date tonight, and so to me, I'm getting better at it. It's been a process of my own understanding. I don't believe there's ever balance, but understanding what I consider like I'm not a big fan of schedule, like routine. I'm a big fan of discipline. I think once you wake up, let's say you're supposed to get up at 8 a.m. every day or 7 a.m. You get up at 8:15. All of a sudden you're in a bit of a rush because you're like, oh, my whole day's out of whack.
Yeah, totally.
So I think it's more about discipline. Um, I'll be the first to work late into the evening as needed. I'll be the first to get up early as needed. Do what I need to do. And um, but I find that I'm my best self when I also immerse myself into a world outside of what I'm doing. So I feel like the head gets a little foggy and the lights get a little dim when I just day after day after day and sometimes that's needed. Sometimes you're going through a storm, but um, you know, getting that opportunity to step away and feel that love and support and that's a powerful thing. Even stuff like this, but I mean, it's to be able to hopefully somebody gets something out of this, but also just for us to connect a little deeper. I mean, time well spent. You know what I mean? And you know, at the end of the day, it's clothing and it's a business. I don't. I have a very strong emotional connection with it, but I also have a very practical connection with it.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I totally agree with that. I think that, it's funny. I try not to use the term balance, even though it's sort of commonplace. I try to use the term harmony
Mm,
because at the same time, like, there's never any balance. It's never equal. But there are times that you're going to spend doing more of one activity and less of another. And that time's going to switch like next week. Right. And that's okay. But no, that's awesome.
yeah, I think just in comment, give you your flowers. Is I think the two times most recently we spoke, your kids have come in, and I think it's more important that they get that moment. You know what I'm saying? Versus
Totally.
which speaks a lot about you and the way you probably operate your business, the passion you have for the people that work for you. So I kind of, you know what I'm saying? Like that to me, it's like there. I guess that's the balance or the harmony, if you may,
Hmm.
and knowing within reason. And business gets in front of a lot of things many times, but pulling yourself back to a place where that you recognize how important that is super awesome.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we'd be nothing without the people that support us, and family normally is a pretty good driver of that. So,
It's a good indication.
awesome. Well, Cadogan, look, man, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it, and love what you guys are doing. We love being a part of the journey, and just very excited to work with you through all the things that you're driving towards here. So, again, thank you.
No, thank you, bud. You've been amazing. Troy's been rock solid. So we're truly grateful on our end. So thank you so
Awesome.
much.
Rocking. I love it. All
Cool.
right, my friend. You have a great day.
Take care. Enjoy.
All right. Bye.